Welcome back to our English lesson for today. So today we're going to use the model text box up to help develop our own ideas. And this will lead into a little bit of a shared box up and a shared write. And this is what we would normally do during our unit. We think about how we box up the model text, which then leads into a shared write, which then you can help use to help you formulate your own box up. Now, what we're also going to do today is go through a little bit of a grammar session with you as well, just to try and help you with descriptive writing. And that should help when we come to think about doing our next part, which is the shared write, and you following on from it, so that you can help develop your own ability to do descriptive writing. So we're going to go through a few hints and tricks, and then I'm going to get you to try a little bit of a short write activity before we move on to our box up. So how to improve our descriptions. So cut out obvious descriptions. When you write a description, the reader already has in their head some idea of what you're talking about. So you don't now need to state the obvious. Why use those particular words to describe something when the reader already knows them? So for example, if you say the blue sky with white fluffy clouds, everyone knows really that normally the sky is blue and that clouds are white and fluffy. It would only be the case if you were describing them in a different way, or you're trying to describe them to show something important. Maybe the sky was darkening and the white fluffy clouds becoming thunderous, at which point you're using that description in order to help the reader. But at this point, the majority of people know that. So what you're trying to do is you say, okay, I know that's how we've been taught to describe what's there, but now we're getting to the stage where we can really use our skills to help create a really interesting image and picture for the reader, and to make sure every word that they read is purposeful to move the story on, or to help the reader get involved with the story. So when somebody hears the word sky, they'll picture it blue. And when they picture clouds, they'll picture them white and fluffy. And they just don't necessarily, and sometimes just bog down your writing, making it feel longer than it necessarily needs to be. And people can get bored or frustrated when reading that sort of thing. So what you want to do is cut out those simple descriptive words, those words that aren't necessarily because people already know them. And then maybe think of a different way to describe it. So the sky was dotted with cotton, in which case we are likening the clouds to cotton. It's a metaphor. And this then paints the image in their head straight away, but in a much shorter sentence without the fluffy description that isn't necessarily needed. So it's the same image, but shorter and more focused, and people have a very clear idea of exactly what you mean. The next trick is thinking about using surprising words. So once they're free of those obvious descriptions that you've used before, you have a lot more space to add in more interesting words and interesting ways of phrasing things. For instance, if you want to describe a rainy day, the easiest way to describe it would be mention the stormy sky. But you could change the word stormy to something different. Use it like it might be a personification and talk about the angry sky. Give it an aspect that it doesn't necessarily have, or a boiling sky. And that gives this idea of that tumultuous sky that people can see when they picture a stormy sky. And it just is that little bit more interesting and gives a clearer image in the reader's head. And what you can do is, if you're going to use a common adjective, you can think about other words to describe the same thing. And then you can use them in unique ways in order to keep the writing fresh and new, and not the same thing again and again and again. If in your writing you're always using the same descriptive words, people stop seeing them. They're not as interesting. They don't help really drive your story or your writing forward. And so people gloss over them and they just become another word rather than a purposeful word which helps the reader get more involved in the story. Another way we can do it is to remember the sensory part of things. And this is really important because what you're trying to do is you're trying to show people, not telling them what it is. So by adding sensory detail, this is a really good way of showing this. Now, we've talked about show, don't tell before. What you're trying to do is get the reader to see what you're describing rather than just telling them what it is. And the reason why this is more important is that it gets the reader more involved, it gets them more interactive. And this happens in books and it happens in films. So you get a lot of films that currently tell and don't show. So they feel like they have to explain everything that's going on with a voiceover over the top. And actually that takes away from the interaction with the watcher or the reader with whatever the description happens to be. If they're not having to focus on the words that are happening, but can see the detail, they can see it, then they're more involved. And this works when you're just writing descriptively as well. If you get them to see it, to hear it, to taste it, to smell it, then they'll be more involved in what is going on in the description. So sprinkle in or put in specific details to appeal to the reader's senses, their sight, their smell, their taste, their touch, and what they can hear. And by doing this, you bring that scene to life. You make it feel more real. You link it to what the reader already knows. Not only now can they see it, but they might be able to think about what they can hear. Think about that scene we had from yesterday's short, right in that foggy forest. What can you feel? What can you hear? What can you touch? Maybe as you're walking through this dimly lit, foggy forest, you can feel the clamminess of the moisture in the air on your skin. You can hear dull noises of forests in the background, but because of the fog, they're dimmed and the noise could be anything. Maybe you can smell that fresh scent of fallen leaves and crumpled undergrowth, hinting at something else to come. And by doing that, you get that picture in your head. It's been Christmas recently, and everyone knows, and you probably smelt it when you walked through the front doors of the school, that pine smell, that pine tree, that smell that you get. And straight away, as soon as you smell that, you see a pine tree. And it's using those little tricks that really brings alive your descriptions to the reader. Another way that you can think of it is using figurative language to describe things in more interesting ways. Comparisons, like similes, using like or as, or metaphors, saying something is something else. His nose was a gnarled root growing out of his face, rather than his nose was twisted and misshapen. And what you can see is that it just takes that moment for the reader to think about what you mean by what you're reading. And it's that moment thought, which means it sticks in your reader's head more than just telling them something. If you have to get the reader to think about what you're writing, they have to process it more. And by processing it more, it sticks in their head more and it makes it more purposeful for them. If you're just telling them everything, then they don't ever have to think for themselves about it. And this can mean that they just read the surface of it. But when you have to get them to think about what's being read, they get more involved in the story and what's happening in it. Other types of figurative language could be onomatopoeia. And these are words that sound like what they mean. So the pitter-patter of raindrops. And you can hear that. When you hear the rain falling, you hear pitter-patter, 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 pitter-patter as it falls on the ground. And these onomatopoeia, these words which sound like they actually sound, really help somebody understand the context and the noise which is happening at the time as well. And finally, hyperbole. And hyperbole is a form of exaggeration. So he rang the door a million times. Now, he probably didn't ring the doorbell a million times, but it feels like that. And it might feel like I drone on and on and on and on, whereas actually it's only 10 minutes or whatever it happens to be. But it's hyperbole. What you're trying to do is make a bigger thing out of a smaller idea. And this just means that you're exaggerating it so it sticks in your reader's mind slightly more, because they have to imagine what you actually mean by that. One other thing which is quite important is being careful of over description. To create an effective descriptive writing, sometimes less is more. What you're trying to do is get the reader to be involved in what they're reading and letting them almost use part of their imagination to get them involved. And this is kind of the difference between a story and a film. In a film, you see it, you know exactly what they mean because they're showing you it. Whereas in a book, you have ownership over that story. The imagery within the book or the descriptions within a book, what you're reading, become your own. They are part of your imagination. And everybody that reads that book might imagine it slightly differently, although it's written the same way. And that story then means something more to them because it's part of their imagination. So when you're writing a description, try and limit yourself to 1 or 2 interesting details for each time that you're trying to describe something, introducing a character or a setting. Describe in a different way, use a different phrase, introduce different things as you talk about them. But in one sentence, if you're using more than 1 or 2 interesting details, it can be overbearing and it can be over descriptive, which sometimes causes the reader to turn off because all they feel they're reading is the description. Okay, so your short write task for today. What I want you to try and do is use those tricks we've talked about to write a description, to help you write a description about the 2 characters that are below me, the dragon and the hero. Now, you've got an image to help you, but obviously you have your own ideas as well. And please use your imagination to describe them in whichever way you like. What you could also do is look back at the description you did yesterday for the setting and see if you can improve it by using some of these tips. So our top tips are: cut out obvious descriptive words. Use surprising words, more interesting words in order to describe them. Use people's senses to help you get them involved in the writing. Make use of figurative language like similes, metaphors, or onomatopoeias. Think about who is doing the describing and be wary of over-description. Pause now and have a go. Okay, so on to our main task. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the model box up and your own nightmare and think about what we could change in order to make the story our own. So in a minute, I'm going to show you the box up and then we'll use that to help us think about it. So what different ideas could you use instead? Now, this really is just a way of getting as many different ideas down as possible. You're not necessarily going to use all of your ideas in one go, but what you want to do is think about what bits can I change and what could I change it to? And you come up with a few different ideas. And then later on, when you come to write it, you're just going, okay, I'm going to use that idea and that idea and this idea. So what I want you to do when you go through it in a minute is use the last column of the box up, and you can write this as we normally do your 3 columns, split it up. And in that last box, you're going to put your own ideas that we will hopefully be able to share in our next live session. So here's our box up. What you'll notice is the nightmare is blank because it's yours and you can fill in that one. So the first thing we've got is anticipation, the introduction. So we've got hear and listen well. We know it's set in ages past in Denmark and filled with monsters. We've got the introduction of our support character, which is Hrothgar, the warrior king. He's generous and fair and defeated many foes when he was young. He built Harut, which was an amazingly decorated hall, a mead hall. Hrothgar holds a feast for all. It's very noisy. And that wakes the monster Grendel, which attacks Harut, leaving no one alive and this continues for 12 years. So what you're going to do in the box alongside it is think about the bits we could change. So we could change where it's set. Maybe it's not set in Denmark, but it's set in Norway or in Britain. Maybe we can change the name of the king. Maybe it's the queen. Maybe it's a god. Maybe it's a town, a mayor. Maybe they aren't as nice as they actually are. What have they built? What have they got? Maybe it's just their town who's talking about where they are. What is it that they do? Do they hold a feast, a party, or just a gathering? And what happens at this that means that that monster comes and attacks it? Then you can change the monster. You can change how long it's been there for. Then you get your dream. So we talk about the news traveling far. There being lots of powerful warriors, but here it's but only one, the bravest, Beowulf, responds and decides to stop it. Sails to Denmark on the Whale Road and takes warriors with him. He meets the king and tells him he will defeat Grendel. The king is happy and they feast until night falls. Now, again, you can change this. So when he meets the king, you can have different ideas as to what the conversation is when he meets the mayor. Is he the only one that responds? Maybe there are others that respond beforehand, but all are defeated without luck. Maybe Beowulf decides after hearing all of those failed people that he's going to go there. Is his name Beowulf? Is it something different? Again, does he sail to Denmark where you've set it? Does he sail? Does he ride his horse? Does he take a cart? Remember, this is set a long time ago. We're still going to keep that idea. It's still set in the Anglo-Saxon time or before. So we're just trying to think about where we go with that. Then we've got our frustration. So darkness swallows the night. We're just changing the time, making them aware that it's night time. Grendel comes to Harut as normal. Beowulf hides and waits and decides not to use a weapon, which is an interesting choice. The main character jumps onto the monster and grabs hold and never lets go. And we repeat this 3 times. And he tries to escape and breaks everything around him by reaping and thrashing. That's our ideas from our model text. What could we change? Well, we could change the time of day if we wanted to. We could say that actually, rather than the hero waiting for Harut, for Grendel to come to Harut, maybe he goes out to find Grendel. Does he decide to use a weapon or not? Or why does he decide not to use a weapon or not? Does he grab hold of the monster's arm, or is it something else that he does? Maybe we want to repeat something, but think about what we're repeating. Maybe repeat the fact that the monster is attacking our hero, and you talk about the attack 3 times. So we're just trying to pick apart what we can change. The next one after that is that you'll have your nightmare. And your nightmare is whatever you want it to be, but what you're going to do is thinking about the bits that you can change in order to make it new and different. And then finally, we got our miraculous escape. So Beowulf manages to pull Grendel's arm off, and Grendel's in pain and has to leave. And on his way out, he smashes a wall down, leaving Beowulf with his arm. So Grendel's dying, but trying to get back to his lair, and he's bleeding everywhere. And we talk about this drop by drop. News of the victory spreads, and Beowulf displays his grim trophy, the arm of Grendel, for all to see, which is hung in the gables of Harut. So when we think about what we can change in this one, we can think about the manner of how our hero defeats the monster. Does he pull an arm off, or is there something else that happens in order that we know that it's still defeated? Does he escape and die on his way to escape, or does he die within the hall itself? How does the news spread? What does the hero do in order to show his victory to everybody else? And all I want you to do is write down ideas, as many ideas as you can. And then what we'll do is we'll talk through those ideas, pick a few for us to use in order to use in our shared writes before we go on to plan our own. And this is really just a time to get as many ideas down as possible, because some of those ideas you might be able to use in your own version of the story rather than our shared story. But we're going to pick a few to use in our shared, change it as we go along and just see what we can do in that regard. But it doesn't matter if you've got lots of ideas, because actually what you will do eventually is you'll use those ideas that you're more interested in, which is probably the best way to go about it. It's always better to have lots of ideas than have none to start with. Okay, have a go at that, and I'll see you in the next live session. Goodbye. See you in the next video.